I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum!
Astro Radio is a horror, cult, exploitation film podcast by filmmakers, critics, musicians, journalists, and fans for the film obsessed. Here is your host, Derek Terry.
So tonight we originally wanted to sit and talk about at least 2 official Maniac movies and one movie that was labeled overseas as a Maniac movie, which I'll count. After watching it, I'm going to fucking count it as a sequel to Maniac.
It's close enough.
It's goddamn. I mean, it's got Joe Spinell, for Christ's sake. So I'm going to count it.
I mean, it could almost be a prequel.
It could. I think,
yeah, with his mother's alive in it.
True, but his mother's much nicer in that one.
Yeah, that's all I got.
The 3 movies we're going to talk about tonight are William Lustig's Maniac, the remake of Maniac, and then what is labeled Maniac 2 Love to Kill overseas. Here, released by Troma. It's released under the name The Last Horror Film. And the reason we're going to be talking about this tonight, I know we've sat and talked about the remake of Maniac a ton on Astro Radio Z. I brought it up a ton because when I first saw it, the damn thing blew me the fuck away. I thought it was stylish. The soundtrack's really fucking good. It's got that synth wave, real darkness to it. Love it. And Maniac is a slime ball, gross classic. So when I was cruising around on the interwebs, which I'm happy to do when I have nothing going on, I stumbled across one of these like gorehound groups. And I maybe it was a DVD collector group. I don't remember what it was, but somebody had shown or posted about this Maniac 2 Love to Kill DVD booklet that had been released in the last month or two. And I remember posting it to our group going, what the fuck is this? The only Maniac 2 that I was aware of was the little, the forgotten footage that was on the Maniac Blue Underground Blu-ray. Had you seen that prior, Seth?
Yeah, the Mr. Robbie footage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like one little scene.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's absolutely. I wonder if that was just like, they weren't actually filming a movie with that, were they?
I think they were. I think it was around the time of Joe Spinell's death.
Because it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So what used to happen back in the day, the overseas people would appropriate titles in order for them to take movies that they thought thematically could work, that they could sell. I mean, there's 500 Django movies, for Christ's sake, overseas, and none of them have to do with fucking Franco Nero. They took this movie, The Last Horror Film, and then retitled it and sold it as if it was an official sequel to William Lustig's Maniac. And I, of course, upon seeing this I don't know if I had ever actually seen The Last Horror Film before this. Because when I finally turned it on, it's on Amazon Prime for free, and it's in HD, and it looks wonderful. I started watching going, holy fuck, I have never seen this movie. I've seen that cover a lot, though. Had you seen the last horror movie before this show?
Yeah, I got a bootleg of it like 10 years ago, and it had that artwork with the clapboard and the head, Caroline Munro's head in it. Yeah, and watched it shortly after Maniac, because I think that's how I discovered it as well. It was a pseudo sequel, and fell in love with it pretty much instantly.
It's very similar in ways, and I could see how they could market it as a sequel, because you had Joe Spinell again. You had Caroline Munro. You got these 2 principal actors that were in the original Maniac, and Joe Spinell again plays a crazy person that goes around killing everybody. So I could see how they could do that. But anyways, long story short, we decided, well, let's sit and talk about these movies and do a show about Maniac proper, because I mean, why not? We haven't done one yet here on Astro Radio Z. So Seth and I, as a tradition, delayed this show by like 2.5 weeks. For some reason, we can't seem to like pull ourselves together and say, hey, let's do it this night. The night comes around. Oh, can we do it the next night? Can we do it the next night? How about next week? What about the week after that? So we watched these movies like 2 weeks ago. I don't think we're going to do, I don't really want to do an in-depth, like, let's go through each of these movies type episode, because I think there's a lot of people out there that do that. I would like to just talk about them all in general, how from Maniac 1 to the remake of Maniac, how things have kind of changed and how they all relate to each other and whatnot. So, Seth, before we get into this, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Got over the flu that kept the podcast from getting done on time, and that's it. I'm good. I'm doing great.
We don't have any lists to do.
No list.
This podcast.
I'm feeling good.
Thankfully. The funny thing is, I've watched a lot of quote unquote Oscar-worthy films in between this show and watching these Maniac movies. Because I think you and I watched these Maniac movies the night before we originally were going to do this podcast and marathoned them.
Yeah, we didn't give ourselves too much leeway on it. So
no, I watched all three of them in one night.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I really don't know if that's a good way to watch these movies.
I could see it, a lot of stuff blending together.
I think the main thing is, and I'm going to take for granted the vast majority of you listeners have seen Maniac, at least the original one. And if you haven't, Seth, you want to give the listeners a little quote unquote synopsis as to what Maniac is?
Yeah, sure. Joe Spinell plays Frank Zito, a damaged man living in New York City in the late 70s, 1980 era, grimy New York City. And he's kind of damaged by the past with his mother, who was abusive. And he goes out stalking women and scalping them to put on his mannequin collection that is in his apartment.
And these mannequins appear to him to be real people.
Correct. They haunt him in his apartment.
He scalps these women so that he can keep them with him. For some reason, the hair is significant to him. It's not really explored in the movie itself, but I think it's just a piece of them, a memento to keep. And the women in general are reduced to objects in this film, hence the mannequins that he sees and he keeps all over his room. Okay, so we have the original Maniac, which is about the crazy guy. Then we have the second movie, the last horror movie, which is Maniac 2, Love to Kill, which is, again, Joe Spinell plays this unhinged character who wants to be a movie director, an auteur. He lives with his elderly mother and is stalking Carolyn Monroe, who is this B scream queen, and decides to follow them over to the Cannes Film Festival and film his magnum opus starring her. And while he's over there, proceeds to start killing every last person that's associated with her in very grisly ways and filming them. So he's still in that mode from the original Maniac, where he's delusional. There's obsessiveness going on. He obviously is just looking at most of the women as objects to be in his movie yet again. Yet there's a very meta angle to the entire thing. So it's a little different than the original Maniac. Then we have the remake of Maniac, which is essentially the same story of the original Maniac, only told in a first-person perspective, with Elijah Wood occasionally popping his face out in mirrors. Surprisingly, upon rewatching it this time, it's beat for beat almost the exact same thing as the original Maniac. Did you find that odd watching it again?
Yeah, it didn't seem to be that straightforward of a remake the first time I watched it, but it's very much the same. Just presented differently, wrapped up differently.
Right. Well, it doesn't have the scene with Tom Savini trying to get his slime on and then getting his head exploded with a goddamn shotgun. That's not in there.
God, it's a great scene.
It's an amazing. Tom Savini is a real fucking piece of shit in most of these movies.
Yeah, well.
What are you trying to say here, Seth?
Hey, nothing. I'm just saying he has a reputation, but I've met the man. He was pleasant as hell. So, reputation be damned.
So I was really shocked because I was with you. I think first time I saw Maniac, I was blown away by the remake, and I maybe had distanced myself enough to where it didn't feel exactly the same thing. Now, upon rewatching it, it was so beat for beat, and watching it directly after the original, I don't know if you felt this way. I did not like it as much this time.
No, I didn't either. And that definitely played a role in it, was how, beat for beat it was. But also the point of view angles that it used with what the hell is his name? You just said it.
Elijah Wood.
Fucking Elijah Wood, Frodo. Yeah. It really stilted the whole movie for me on the second watch.
Yeah.
Everything felt wooden. And I liked it the first time. I liked it a lot, the way they presented it. But this time it just felt like, I don't know, maybe I was more in tune and adept to everything going on, but it just felt like it was forced. Everyone was trying to force a good performance instead of being able to be natural had it been a more traditional presentation.
Right.
Straightforward.
Yeah, I think I agree with you totally, because when you watch the original Maniac, that's a movie that's hinged upon amazing performances. Because Joe Spinell in that movie is literally unhinged. And the entire movie is carried by his strange, like, manic performance. The only thing about that original movie that has never worked for me, which they solved in the remake, was the introduction of the photographer, the female photographer, which in the remake, they bring this love interest into the film rather early on. And in the original Maniac, she's basically a third act kind of plot device as his ultimate downfall. And let's talk about that for a second. So you have these two movies where Maniac, obviously we just discussed, it was more of a beat for beat remake, but they just kind of switched things up and made it POV for some reason, which I think I agree with you. At first I was really taken by that, but now watching it, you realize that you have no connection to the Maniac. You are the Maniac, and you're just vicariously kind of like experiencing his life, which I thought was really disappointing after watching Joe Spinell. But one of the main differences was this love interest character, where you think eventually Joe Spinell in the original one, he's actually kind of falling for this girl. And in the remake, maybe he was falling. I don't know, man. I couldn't quite grasp that character in the first one, and it made a little more sense in the second one. But in the third act, all of a sudden, Joe Spinell comes across this carriage in the middle of Central Park, and this lady randomly snaps a picture of him, and he catches her doing it, and she runs off and leaves her camera bag, and he follows her home. And then all of a sudden, he dresses up like he's some sophisticate and convinces her that he's a photographer or some talent agent. Like,
in his best silk shirt.
We had just literally watched this dude scalp so many fucking women and hookers and all this shit. And then all of a sudden he's dressed up in these shitty fucking buttoned up silk shirts and fucking aviator glasses and walking into photo shoots.
Suits.
that fucking shit killed me. Like every single time I've seen this movie, I'm like, this is some bullshit. I don't believe this for a fucking second.
I think it's great though because he's not a man concerned with fashion and the way he presents himself to people. So I could see that being the best he could pull together to try and get this woman.
But she buys it.
That's the questionable part.
I mean, we're to believe that this exotically beautiful woman who is a part of the New York art scene and is a fashion photographer, somebody that I'm sure she has men lined up around the block, gives 2 shits a time to this schlub that is so goddamn sweaty you could probably smell him 2 blocks away in some goddamn shitty silk shirt. You're supposed to believe she's interested in this schlub.
He showed up with a teddy bear.
That's got to be my angle from now on when I go on dates. I'll just wear the shittiest silk shirt I could find. Make sure I ran to the restaurant so that I just have a glisten over me. And show up, and then halfway through the day go, oh, here, I brought you something. And it's some shitty fucking teddy bear that I got at the county fair. So tell me, does this last act completely derail Maniac for you?
No, not at all. I mean, it's a questionable, you gotta suspend your disbelief for it, but I think it still works in the sense of the film. I mean, she could be, giving the guy time of day is a nice gesture, and quickly has to deal with him in the cemetery crying over his dead mother.
See, the thing is, the way they present this toward the end of this movie. I mean, this guy, as we had said, he has been systematically offing random lowlifes around the neighborhood that he lives in, the borough he lives in, between just random people that are parking attempting to fuck, or hookers, or just any woman that he fancies. He ends up eventually strangling them and stabbing them and then cutting off their hair. We're to believe that this beautiful woman all of a sudden is interested in this guy. It looks like he has sweated through 3 undershirts. And she goes out on multiple dates with this guy.
And man, New York's expensive. A free dinner is a free dinner. He's taking her to the nicest corner Italian restaurants, sucking plates of spaghetti.
And the funny thing is, at the date, he's sitting there all uncomfortable, looking and stirring into his food, not really talking to her, and she's still engaged with him. This last act has always thrown me for a loop. It's always been like, man, can we get through this to get to the insane finale of this movie, which is probably the best, for me, always been one of the best parts of the movie. It's a huge gore piece where eventually all his mannequins, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this 30-plus-year-old movie, which I can't believe anyone listening to my show hasn't seen Maniac, where all the mannequins come back to life and tear him to shreds. It's a great gore piece.
It is.
Great set. That whole, last 25 minutes of this weird side romance angle has always been like, man, this is some of the most forced bullshit I've ever seen in a movie in my entire life. So they take this portion in the remake, they spread it out over the entire film, where eventually, after we get our first POV kill, where this little punker chick takes him back after the most uncomfortable first date.
Oh boy.
Which I think most people would look at Elijah Wood and go, okay, this guy is on some heavy medication, obviously. He's spacing out and running away constantly. Most women that I know probably would have left him the fucking tab for the bill and walked away when he went into the bathroom. But neither here nor there. She takes him back to his place and gives him head, and he strangles her and scalps her, of course. After that, all of a sudden, this beautiful woman snaps pictures of his mannequins in his shop window, and they strike up a relationship. Now, do you feel that this was the one thing from the original that they did well?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship struck up, I think, more naturally. He's not a bad looking guy, a little strange in the movie, obviously, but he's not a Joe Spinell character where you look at him and go, no attractive woman is going to give him the time of day. He's a decent looking young guy. She's a good looking young girl. I think the thing that makes it a little bit unbelievable is that she snaps pictures of mannequins for her art, and he just so happens to like restore old mannequins. We're talking about Los Angeles in this one. It's like one of the biggest cities in the world, and two mannequin freaks happen to fall over each other. If we're going to get into like things that are unbelievable in these movies, that one always kind of threw me for a loop. Like, really? You take pictures of mannequins, and this guy just so happens to kill people to put hair on mannequins?
Yeah. In a room that's right off of the front of his shop. I mean, he doesn't even remotely try to hide the fact, other than some plastic up over a door frame, that if you walked 5 more feet, Moy, you're going to see my murder collection.
Yeah. If you think that's a bathroom, you're going to end up in there.
Yes. You're going to stay with me for a while. Yeah, that was one of the many things about the remake that I did like. They tried to take certain aspects of that original film that were kind of hokey and didn't quite work, and tried to make sense of them. And for that, I really liked it. What I didn't like now, upon rewatching it, obviously back to back, which listeners, I don't recommend you doing that whatsoever. If you're going to watch these, give them their own time and let them breathe, because this viewing experience almost ruined the remake of Maniac for me, and proved me wrong. And I know on many other podcasts of Astro Radio Z, I've declared that the remake of Maniac was the better movie. I take that back. I take that back completely, because as we had said before, I think the difference between the two movies, other than the POV gimmick, and that they kind of make more sense of certain aspects of the original that just were clunky and didn't work. Unfortunately, because of the POV gimmick, you lose any connection or relation to Elijah Wood's Maniac that you get with Joe Spinell. Joe Spinell, you believe he's a fucking crazy, unhinged piece of shit. Even though he has a lot of silk shirts. He's a crazy, unhinged piece of shit. Elijah Wood just feels awkward the entire movie. And I just, unfortunately, this time through, didn't buy it. And there was multiple instances where they tried to force certain things in, like the scene where he stabs the girl in the parking lot and they got to recreate the original Maniac poster.
Yeah. I thought that scene in the parking lot was sort of out of character for the Maniac.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt like it wasn't something how he would go about killing somebody.
Nope. He was the kind of person that drew power from having someone alone with him. You know, it wasn't about him finding prey and having to make this huge scene, which that was. I mean, that he's completely out of control there, where he was in the original film. He controlled the situation until his brain took over and the mania took over.
Right.
But that was a very controlled, that's how he could do this for so long, is that he was so like controlling and manipulative in every aspect of his life. He was able to lure these people, these women and these people back into basically to trust him and then murder him, where that scene in the remake is a stalk and kill scene where this woman is literally screaming in the subway, in the train station, or wherever it was, down streets, in parking lots, in the most empty section of LA you've ever seen. And then he kills her with this huge auditory sting. And that scene felt really out of place. Like overall, other than obviously we had talked that we both kind of felt like the remake of Maniac kind of fell apart upon this viewing. What was it about that remake that did work for you?
I think before I saw it, when they were talking about the remake and the trailer came out, I thought one of the big things that I was against it was that you're going to lose the seediness of old New York that I think played into the original almost as its own character. There was, New York was not a place to go if you didn't belong there. And you could see something like Joe Spinell's character doing that in old New York, just running around, taking out hookers and taking out, anybody, any woman that he wants to feel power over. I thought, the 21st century, it was 2012 it came out. The movie looks slick and shiny. I thought it was going to lose the feeling that Bill Lustig was able to capture in both the natural setting of New York and just how, an exploitation filmmaker of that era made movies. I don't think the shininess of the production lost that feeling for me. It still felt like a grimy movie to me. And even on the second viewing, where some things fell apart, I still thought, man, I can believe that this is happening in this city, and this city's kind of a dirty place. There's a lot of weird shit going on around the city in the backgrounds of scenes, and just not being the happy, cleaned up city that like Manhattan has turned into. So I like that they were able to capture that vibe without having to fake it. So many movies do with digital dirt and grime and just crap like that. They didn't fall for that kind of gimmick.
Mm-mm. No, it was a beautiful movie, actually. Like the cinematography is really tight. The lighting is so spot on. The soundtrack, if anything I'm going to take away from the remake of Maniac is that soundtrack. It is
absolutely
awesome. It is awesome. And it makes that movie, and it makes it a movie of this time where, we've watched all this shit now, like It Follows and all this stuff where it's that throwback synth wave that is attempting to recreate something from the 80s. But it's something very modern at the same time. It works in this movie's favor because of the setting and because of the look. It works perfectly. I think as a stylistic film, it's good. It's really good. Unfortunately, that POV stuff is not going to age well.
No.
And it's not just because of this movie. I think because of subsequent movies that have done it now, it's just not aging well.
I think, if for doing it, it was an interesting style choice, and they did well with it. But like you said, it's not aging well. It's the seams are showing in the performances and the dialogue, and like it's just not aging well. You said it.
It's a gimmick.
Yeah,
that's all it is. Yeah. It's just a gimmick, and unfortunately, it doesn't allow Elijah Wood to be able to deliver a performance.
No. I think he did the best he was able to do given the circumstances. I think most of the actors did the best they could, but it's like you're not interacting with anybody. You're just sort of delivering lines to a camera.
Yep.
And pretending someone is there. It's just the natural connection and vibe is gone.
Yep. It's very stilted.
Yep.
Much of it. And I don't know if you watch, because I have this on Blu-ray. If you watch the deleted scenes, and some of them have incomplete visual effects, because obviously they had to superimpose Elijah Wood in mirrors and stuff like that weren't there, and get rid of the camera that's, following these people around and stuff like that. It's even more apparent.
No, I don't think I've watched the deleted scenes, but I don't want to now.
No. I mean, they're deleted there's not much to them.
Right.
But it's unfortunate. I think if this movie would have been shot in a traditional way and Elijah Wood was given a little more to chew on, now looking back at it, I would have probably liked it better. I think the first time I was caught by its style more than anything, because we've stated many times on the show, Seth, you and I, we're big Dario Argento fans.
Oh, yeah.
We're big fans of, avant-garde, over-the-top Italian style. And this movie has a lot of it in it because it's so beautiful. And there's such striking, dynamic primary colors in a lot of it. But unfortunately, as a gimmick, which horror movies every now and then, it's cool to see something try and push the boundaries and try to do something new. I just don't think I'm going to go back to this one ever again after this watch.
Yes, style over substance can work when the style is great. But when it's not that great, it can definitely lead to one time being okay and then kind of falling apart on repeated viewings like this one.
Yeah. Well, let's talk before we move on to the last movie, the one that I'm actually more excited to talk about than either of these two. The ending. How did you think that stacked up compared to the original Maniac, the whole mannequin slaughter at the very end?
Oh, man. I'm forgetting how it did now. Refresh me real. Is it the same thing?
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing where, he corners the love interest at her apartment because she's has a friend that's been a little weird to her and somebody she knows is missing, and he goes up there and she finds out, he's a fucking lunatic, and there's a big commotion and murder and blah, 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 blah. And he ends up back at his place, his mannequin shop, and all the mannequins come back to life and start tearing him to shreds the way that in the original they quote unquote tore him to shreds. And then instead of it just being them tearing his head off, they rip his face off to expose that he's a mannequin underneath.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was whatever. It was fine. You had to refresh me. I mean, that's again, beat for beat, it ran together. I didn't even remember that until you told me, and it's only been 2 weeks.
Yeah, the symbolism was nice. That's about it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say with it.
Overall, what are you gonna say? Original or remake? Are you gonna watch again?
Original all day. Original. The first time I watched the remake, I still don't mind the remake, but again, it's not aging well, and I don't see it getting any better on repeated viewings. I like what they did or tried to do, I guess, but definitely, if you have to watch one, watch the original.
Hands down, that performance from Joe Spinell is it's the reason to watch the movie. It is absolutely the reason to watch it. I mean, obviously, other than seeing Tom Savini's head completely explode over some chick's face. That's a great fucking sequence.
I love that was an actual shotgun that they just pulled over in New York City and blasted into a car.
It's fucking unbelievable.
And then ran away.
Unbelievable.
Ran away.
That whole movie is just so audacious. It is so uncomfortable to watch. All of it. I mean, there's one sequence in that original where Joe Spinell is just mind his own fucking business and walking down the street, and these two prostitutes proposition him, and the one basically talks him into going up and getting a room. For $100 I'll give you everything. We'll go around the world, baby.
I'll give you the ultimate.
The ultimate.
The ultimate.
In that whole sequence where they're up in that room and she's doing that dance and he just the entire time he's just looking at her like, when am I going to scalp this woman? It's so uncomfortable.
It's just watching him lay there, you can tell he wants nothing to do with this woman dancing around naked. He just wants to scalp her. It's so, oh God.
It is fucking uncomfortable.
You know what I love though? I love that when they're booking that room, he plops down the extra $5 for color TV.
Because the guy is just, he sees him the proprietor of this hotel, which obviously, he knows this is a fuck hotel. It's a fuck shack. And he's just like trying to put surcharges on top of surcharges the entire fucking time. Here he is. Joe Spinell's looking at, he's already got upsold to $100 for the ultimate with this hooker. And now this guy is just like, okay, well, you want a room? You want, what about 1 or 2 beds? Color TV. And he just keeps
every time Spinell just pulls out another 20 and pops it down.
I suppose he didn't have to worry too much because he wasn't going to be paying for the hooker service.
This is true.
So he was saving money there, as they say.
Spend money to make money.
God, that's awful. Just awful. So anyways, for Maniac in the remake, God, really disappointing that the remake just didn't hold up for me. That was a soul crusher the other day, man. Because I have for years now on this podcast declared that was the better movie. I was dead fucking wrong. Dead fucking wrong. So anyways, let's move on to that last gimmick, the last horror film, which if you look it up on Google, folks, Maniac, you look up Maniac 2. Let's see. I'm on the Googles right now. And this is always good podcast and good radio to listen to somebody search for things on the internet. And whoever they got to do the artwork for this, it is so janky as fuck. Have you looked at this?
Are we talking about the clapboard artwork?
No, I'm not talking about the clapboard artwork. I'm also not talking about the one where it's his face repeated in yellow with Carolyn Monroe smack dab in the middle screaming. This is the one where it's essentially a Goodwill version of the Maniac poster. And in one hand, he's holding... Oh my God, I did not notice this until now. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. He's holding a head of a blonde who's decapitated. The other hand, he's holding a Super 8 camera. And in the middle, he's packing some serious fucking heat. I mean, he's got a bulge that nearly goes down to his knee.
Worse than the original Maniac poster?
Seth, look... Bring this thing up on your...
I'm trying to find this one, man. I'm trying to find it.
Just put in Maniac.
All I can find is the clapboard and the head repeated. Oh, is this for that like German release of it?
Yeah. Look at that fucking... That is a fucking dong if I've ever seen a goddamn dong.
It's mid-thigh. Who went to town on that?
Can you imagine? Just think about how this artwork was commissioned out, Seth. So you get because the thing is, it's so improbable. I mean, we're going to go in depth about this dong on the podcast, folks. I'm sorry, but this is what you came here for. So, like I said, it's basically a total bootleg version of the original poster, where his crotch is genuinely flat, and then all of a sudden there's this huge bulge that starts out in the weirdest of places.
And why is there a blood spot right on the head area? I need this as a one sheet just hanging above my bed.
If you had this as a wood sheet hanging above your bed, you would never get laid ever
Jesus, this
again in
poster.
the history of your life.
It's so ridiculous looking.
It is janky as fuck.
Oh,
I urge all of you listeners to go and Google up Maniac 2 Love to Kill and have a good laugh, because this poster, that fucking dong is out of control. So fucking out of control. So let's go. Let's get past the dong. Let's go on to the movie itself now.
That's it, folks. Have a good night.
Yeah, tip your waitress. So this movie, as we had said before, Joe Spinell is another crazy asshole who's attempting a movie about his favorite scream queen actress at the Cannes Film Festival, and he's killing people off one by one. Right off the bat, even though this is a movie, I believe, made by an American, this feels like so much Euro horror from that time. Just the way that it's shot, the way that it's cut, the sound, just the pacing of it. Did this feel like that really shitty early 80s Bruno Mattei garbage to you?
Yeah, where you almost feel like there's some clips missing, some frames missing from some of the edits.
Yeah. You mean like maybe half of a scene?
Yeah. It is very jumpy, but to be fair, they were filming guerrilla style without any permission at Cannes, so
absolutely
a lot of they had to get what they could get and get the fuck out of there.
I loved it for that. And you can tell this whole movie has, even though it does oddly have a similar kind of surreal tone to it that the original Maniac does, it's far lighter in a lot of very weird ways. Mostly that style, like the beginning of it, we have Joe Spinell's character in this film is a rabid horror film fan. And one thing that I thought was really hilarious is that all of these critics were watching these super gross, misogynistic slasher films and treating them like they were watching The Phantom Thread.
Yeah, they every award was being given out to some random horror film at Cannes that year. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like they watched the original Maniac and said, very nuanced, very nice.
Oh, I know Cannibal Holocaust can be seen being screened at some point in the movie.
Yeah, there's a poster in the background, I think.
Very, very avant-garde. Yes. Jared Deodato's the next Polanski.
Oh, the lighting is just superb in this on this shot of this tortoise getting shredded to bits.
The natives portray themselves quite well. I heard they were method.
So right off the bat, that made this movie extremely fun to watch for my buck. I guess maybe it's been a long time since I've watched some of that early 80s Euro horror, because I mean there was a period in time where Anchor Bay and a bunch of other companies were just releasing this stuff wholesale and people were gobbling it up, which I was one of those people. I'm sure you were too, Seth.
Oh, yeah.
And I had figured I had watched all of it. Like I didn't think there was any more for me to explore. And this movie gave me a smile like, holy shit, I missed one. Because there's something about the tone of those movies that were so nonsensical. The soundtrack and the visual worked against each other in a charming way that most movies that were serious movies or American movies just wouldn't do. And it gave those movies a certain kind of character that were so distinctive of that one period of time that once you see like one or two of them, you're like, the moment you notice that in another movie, you're like, oh yeah, this obviously was shot in Italy around like 81 to 85 at some point. So I loved that fucking aesthetic. What do you think about how like the overall aesthetic of Maniac 2 or what should we call this?
I mean, I'd call it the last horror film. That's not what I've always known it by, but We're on a Maniac show. Your show. You call it whatever the hell you want.
Last horror film. We'll do that. So what do you,
All right.
when you go into it, the aesthetic of this movie compared to the rest of the stuff we watched tonight?
Well, it fits both ways. It can fit right in with Maniac. It's a grimy subject matter, makes you feel uncomfortable, but it's got a goofy, light tone to it. So you can sit back and enjoy it and not need the shower or the break that you need after the original Maniac. You can come out kind of smiling that was a hokey, but not in a way that it ruins the movie.
Yeah. And Joe Spinell, he's kind of all over the place in this movie. At times, he does feel like a character from the Maniac movie. And at other times, it's almost like he's like this is a comedy in which his character, it's a very weird tone that this movie, because I think this movie isn't attempting to make a horror movie. I think this is supposed to be some meta tongue-in-cheek comedy in some weird way.
Well, on the wiki page, it describes it as a horror comedy film. I've never really thought of it that way, but now that you've brought it up, it definitely is. I mean, especially his mother is pure comedic relief.
Right. I mean, she's that character that basically he calls her up and she just is so oblivious to everything. It's like, is she even in this movie?
She just wants him to come home and eat macaroni. She's just an old Italian mother to this guy that is potentially one step away from being a complete perverted asshole, maniac killer, following some woman that he claims is starring in his movie that doesn't exist halfway around the world to take pictures of her. But then he's also kind of likable about it because he has such passion and drive with it, and he's sort of silly about it sometimes. It works both ways.
I still like the original Maniac, where we couldn't believe that the sophisticated fashion photographer would give this slimy asshole 1 second of her time. Why weren't anyone putting any security around these people at all? When you have this obvious creep running around with a camera, which I couldn't believe that he's just running her into crowds, filming, into clubs, into strip clubs, filming with a huge camera.
That camera is not small. That is big by 1980s standards. That is a full camera.
That is definitely not the Super 8 camera that Captain Dong is carrying in the Maniac 2 poster.
He needed a hand for the Super 8 and a hand for the Super 15 on that one. I mean, this is like a 16 millimeter camera he's running around with.
Yeah. I mean, there's no hiding the fact that this guy is attempting to film something. He's just walking into premieres and walking everywhere with this humongous camera. Nobody does anything about it, which lends to this air of that the whole film is a work. I mean, obviously, by the end of it, not to give the ending away, but the ending of it basically tells you the whole movie was a work. So, I mean, did you like how it turned into like some meta take on horror fandom and people that make horror films? And are they really maniacs? And is there something wrong with them? Or are they just opportunists looking to express themselves? Did you like that whole angle?
I did. I thought it was a refreshing change than what it could have just been. It would have been fine if it ended up being that Joe Spinell is a crazy man trying to make a movie with an actress he's obsessed with that has no idea she's in his movie. And, it ends with her dying, or the movie is not complete because he dies, or whatever typical horror movie ending they came up with. It would have been fine. The movie still would have been a fun watch.
Right.
But I think that meta angle they took really was a refreshing change for it and pulled the whole thing together to be something that I think stands out 30, 35 years later now. As you just saw it. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't think you would have thought it was as good if it was just a typical ending.
No, not at all. I mean, let's be honest. The vast majority of the film is kind of redundant. It kind of goes through stalk and kill sequences, even though some of them are very stylish and some of them are very oddly reminiscent of Maniac, where his previous kills start coming back to him in visions. And there's a whole sequence that's not unlike a music video where all of a sudden all these zombies are lined up in the middle of a foggy street. And he's filming this elaborate sequence that it was to be expected. It didn't jump out at me as being that different from the original that I kind of figured where it was going to go. And then by the end of it, when it wraps itself up and it does this whole meta thing, you start thinking about the rest of the movie and like, oh yeah, that really fucking makes sense. Like it really did tie the entire thing together, and it made kind of the really weird, surreal aspects of the film and the stylistic choices make sense, as opposed to me going, man, yeah, this really does feel like it's missing entire reels. Like, I don't quite understand what's going on right now. Even though there's a lot of stalk and kill sequences, it did have weird film ticks to it that made sense by the end of the movie, which I really liked. So this one, compared to the other ones, while it's similar in a lot of ways, and I think maybe it was filmed as a comment to Maniac in some weird way, because it's hard to deny that there's a lot of similarities between these two movies. Not just because Carolyn Monroe is in it and Joe Spinell are in it, two principal actors from the original Maniac, but just there are sequences that feel like they're from the original, and there's themes that are there from the original. I just wonder, and maybe I haven't read up on it too much. Do you know anything about, is this supposed to kind of be talking about the original Maniac in a way, or do you think they were just kind of more talking about the general slasher culture and gore culture of the early to mid 80s?
I met Carolyn Monroe a few years ago, and we talked about this a little bit. I commented that I really loved the last horror film, and she said it was really fun to make, and we, as much as you can chat at a convention, a couple minutes. But,
sure.
I mean, she didn't write it, so I don't know how much is true, but she said it was more along the lines of just a comment on fandom and obsession with stardom and things like that. So, and she said it, it was well done, that she was proud to be in it, but as 3-4 minute conversation. So take that for what you will.
Right. Well, I'm surprised out of everything that she'd been in, you brought up the last horror film to her.
Well, I mean, she didn't have any Stella Star pictures on her table, so it was limited. No, I genuinely have loved this movie since the day I saw it. So, I had her sign a Maniac poster, and I talked about this, and it was cool because she said it doesn't get brought up very often. So I got a little bit of conversation out of her, and now I get to share that with the thousands and thousands of listeners of Astro Radio.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, coming from what she said, it does have to do, not poking fun at anybody or attacking horror fans or anything, but just a general comment on, obsession towards stardom and fandom. Or
even obsession towards kind of questionable content. And does that rub off on you in weird ways, or the people, and the ending, without giving it away, is kind of a comment towards, are the people that make this stuff fucked up too? You could take this movie any number of ways, but at the end of the day, this movie is a hell of a lot of fun. If you're going to watch it in a big grouping like we did with the two Maniac films, it fits right in there. Mm-hmm. But it's much lighter. Maybe this is a good one to watch at the end, kind of a palate cleanser, because there are ridiculous kill sequences, some of which the gore is astoundingly great. There's a good decapitation sequence. There is one insanely great shitty dummy that gets thrown off of a castle top. You didn't think we were going to get away with me not talking about that shitty dummy.
Hey, man, I was leaving that to you.
That shitty dummy happened, and I was fucking tears. I was dead. It was so fucking glorious. Terrible. Just terrible. Yeah, I mean, there's some good... Okay, let's be pigs for a second. A lot of beautiful naked women in this movie.
Oh, yeah, just running around the beaches of Cannes.
Oh,
Now, that's one part that kind of throws back to Maniac is when all the, I guess they were actresses or starlets from something at Cannes, and they were laughing at Joe Spinell because they're in the ocean, or is it an ocean? Sea, whatever. They're in the water naked and telling him to come in, and he's sitting there with a camera being a creep, and they're laughing at him.
yeah, he looks like he's about to beat off.
in the grossest way,
Yes.
in one of those mid-thigh kind of ways.
Yes.
So I think that throws back a little bit to the seediness of Maniac, but there is a lot of beautiful women not wearing anything around those beaches.
Oh, I loved this movie.
I wish we got more out of the fake rich cowboy guy. That guy was funny. Hey, just act like you're rich and they'll love you.
Yeah.
I'm from Texas.
All the characters in this movie were great. All the women were insanely hot. The gore is top shelf. It's funny. It's nonsensical. It's gross when it needs to be gross. It's surreal and dark when it needs to be dark and surreal. And at the end of the day, it actually had a point to it. So, man, out of all the movies, I had the most fun with this one. There's no doubt
it's
about it.
easily the most fun. It's definitely the most fun.
It's not the best movie of them all. I mean, the original Maniac is a classic for a reason. That movie, you don't walk away from it not feeling completely disgusting.
Yeah. You might not like it, but you're going to have a reaction to it.
Maniac is one of those films that it's a classic for a reason, as I said before, and I think everyone needs to see it. But I really want to walk away from this episode telling everybody that if you haven't seen the last horror film, do so, like, immediately. It is super fucking fun, and it's on Amazon Prime for free if you have the Amazon Prime membership in HD. It looks wonderful. It sounds wonderful. It's awesome. And there's a great shitty dummy in there. Unfortunately, on Amazon, you're not going to see the Mega Schlong cover. That's not going to be on there. But you can always, Google is your friend if you want to look at painted Schlong. So anyways, any final thoughts on any of this, Seth?
If you haven't seen Maniac, you probably already know you should. But like Derek said, out of this episode, take away the last horror film. It doesn't get talked about as nearly as much as Maniac, but it's a really great film that I think any horror fan needs to check out.
Yeah, 100%. And if you're going to watch the remake of Maniac, which is a fine film, I know we kind of poo-pooed on it most of this episode. It's a fine film. Do not watch it alongside Maniac. Don't do it. It's
space it out.
Yeah, space it out, or just watch it by itself. If you haven't watched any of these, watch the original Maniac first. Obviously, because I think if you watch last horror film or the remake, you'll have an appreciation for those that you wouldn't have if you hadn't watched the original Maniac. So do that. Do that first. So anyways, that's it, Seth. We finally got this fucking episode out there and done. We talked about it.
Oh, it tested us early on.
Ugh, that son of a bitch. Astro Radio Z. Sometimes Astro Radio Z does not come easy to me, folks. If you haven't noticed, the shows have been getting less and less. I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a period funk where I don't want to do any shows right now. That's how I get sometimes with this podcast. It's just a thing I do for fun every once in a while. I ain't feeling it. Shit. Just how it is, dude. You guys don't like it? Do your own goddamn fucking podcast.
Get off his back.
Just can't name it Astro Radio Z. If you want to record episodes of Astro Radio Z and send them to me, and then I'll do an intro, and then I'll let your podcast run, contact me at astroradiozpodcast@gmail.com and I'll consider it.
For the low price of $19.95.
You can record my show for me. We'll see how that goes. Anyways, this is the portion of the show, folks, where my guest shamelessly shills the fuck out of you, Mr. Seth Paulin. Go ahead and shill for my audience.
Hey, guys, you can find me at Celluloid Terror on Blogspot and YouTube for all sorts of horror and cult film reviews. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, all that. And I promise you, if you see me at a convention, I'm not this big of a dickhead.
Yes.
Yeah, so check me out.
Nobody's going to get that reference because I'll have cut all of that out for the Patreon.
Might have to redo that one.
Well, folks, thanks for listening to this extremely rambly, weird, I don't even know how I'm going to put this together episode. Next episode, we're going back to the American Ninja series with American Ninja 3 and 4. So until then, see you later.
You can find Astro Radio Z on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, YouTube, and anywhere podcasts are found. Please help us by subscribing, rating the show, and giving us a review. It helps us get the show out to more listeners. Also, if you would like to hear more of the show and be a more active participant, join the Astro Radio Z Facebook group and page, and join the Patreon. For only $1 a month, you get bonus episodes. Thank you for listening. See you next week, Astro Zombies.